Krystian Zimerman is a very unique artist who went through a profound transformation. In this video, I'll tell you why I'm not very impressed with his early recordings, but absolutely adore some of his later ones. And next time, I'll share some observations on his technique that you can learn from his playing to become a better piano player yourself. So stay tuned. Also, I will share with you some nasty, uncomfortable truths about what it means to play with an orchestra as a soloist and why some of the biggest artists refuse to play with orchestras. So, there are two recordings of the Chopin piano concertos available on YouTube in Zimmerman's interpretation. One where he's very, very young, I don't know exactly, but he looks like maybe 19 or 20 years old, and another from 1999, where he also conducts himself. They are vastly different in terms of interpretation to a truly astonishing degree. The earlier one is a proficient, but rather, I would risk to say standard performance, the kind that is unlikely to impress a really experienced listener, especially if you have played a concerto yourself, if you are a professional musician. Chances are high you won't find it really unique. I would even dare to say that if someone played like this nowadays at the Chopin competition, they would be very unlikely to advance anywhere close to the finals. It's really good, extremely efficient, technique-wise, fantastic, very well optimized, and Zimerman is one of the most optimized piano players on this planet. I'll share a few tips which I've noticed that you can apply to your own playing in the next video. But at the same time, it feels a little bit kind of generic to me, like kind of default expressiveness, let's say, and emotionally almost restrained at times. But the later performance from 1999, on the other hand, is a true work of art. It's really unique, not just in the piano part, but also the orchestra plays so nice, and it plays with incredible nuance and a deep sense of interaction with the soloist. And this degree of collaboration between the soloist and the orchestra is truly fascinating here. And here is a sad truth about our industry. This is why some great artists such as Grigory Sokolov or Arkady Volodos stop playing with orchestras altogether, primarily because the concert business industry has little real interest in the art itself. Because a soloist typically gets just one or two short rehearsals with an orchestra, which is barely enough to run through a concerto once or twice. There is simply no time to rehearse intricate rubato or spontaneous tempo changes. In most cases, a conductor treats a concerto with a soloist as an obligation, something to accompany, while focusing their real attention on the symphony that usually follows in the second half of the show. The orchestra often doesn't properly practice their parts. They open the score at the rehearsal with the soloist and rely on the sight reading primarily. A great example how things can go not really smoothly is exactly that Zimmerman's early recording. Here you can hear that a poor hornist can't help but plays quite dirty and significantly later than the soloist, so they're not in sync altogether. This is quite typical, I have to say, and there are many reasons for it, not just a lack of practice or effort. There are many objective reasons which make it really hard because, for example, each orchestra has its own natural delay, its own internal timing. And when a new conductor comes in, it's not always possible for them to adjust immediately. So what you have to know about how orchestra works, if you're planning to play with an orchestra as a soloist, that when a conductor makes a gesture like play, the sound never happens exactly with that gesture. So you can never expect something like bum. Never happens. The orchestra always comes kind of later after the gesture. So there always will be some kind of delay, something like bum, or maybe even bum. Sometimes it's a really big delay, and each orchestra, if it's a good orchestra, they would be synchronized between themselves, but they would always come with a delay after a conductor, and a conductor has to immediately kind of get used to the delay when they conduct a new orchestra. And many pianists actually don't know this. Of course, great pianists like Zimerman surely know such things, but many other soloists who don't have so much experience playing with an orchestra, they don't know this. And when it comes to situation where a soloist have to follow a lead of conductor, sometimes pianists are ahead of the orchestra because they don't count for this natural delay. But actually what you have to do is to look at the conductor, but also to sense what the concertmeister or the first violinist is doing. So you look at the conductor, but also you keep an eye on keep an ear on the first violinist to be with the orchestra. Otherwise, if you have some tricky situations, like for example, this passage from the Rachmaninoff's second concerto, like this passage is really tricky because with this chord, the orchestra comes. So it has to be perfectly together, which almost never happens because the conductor, a conductor, has to feel the delay of the orchestra. So when the soloist plays that passage, a conductor has to know exactly where to give the gesture so the orchestra would be exactly with that chord. Whether I have to conduct like here or maybe here. So you have to feel the delay and really time it precisely. And the soloist, in turn, also has to look at the conductor, see that they are preparing the gesture, but know that the orchestra comes with a delay. So the conductor makes the gesture and the soloist knows that it's too early to play that chord. I still have to wait for the orchestra because they will come later. That's why if you compare multiple live recordings of this spot, you will notice that mostly people are not together because this math is really, really very difficult. You have to be very sensitive and very experienced in such things. That's why very often people are not together just because it's really difficult. Or, for example, when you sit in the hall, everything sounds perfectly balanced and clear. But on stage, when you play a piano on stage with an orchestra that sits right next to you, the reality is very different. It's extremely common that you simply don't hear everyone. So when I perform with an orchestra, I know that it's completely normal that I can't clearly hear every instrumental group. I can't really hear very well what a hornist is doing or a timpanist is doing. And I certainly can't expect that a horn player or a timpanist will hear all the details of what I am playing, even if they would ever take the time to study how the piano part sounds, which is already kind of above my expectations. So in other words, playing with an orchestra is more often than not a contained mess rather than a perfectly coordinated system. And in this environment, a soloist is expected to play in a generic, standard way. Any trace of originality or ambition to create something unique is often met with a real resistance from a conductor who doesn't really care, management that doesn't want to pay for extra rehearsal time, and orchestra musicians who are frequently so exhausted by an exploitative schedule and low pay. As a result, we get countless generic performances while famous artists earn large fees simply because they're famous, not because they offer something truly distinctive. And both artists and managers know that general public is often not informed enough, not educated enough to recognize just how ordinary or maybe even poor sometimes a performance can be. That's why interpretations like the one Zimerman achieved in 1999 are so extremely rare. And I happen to know some inside stories about this project because I once worked with a manager who was involved in this project, who was working with Zimerman. So the amount of rehearsal time was astonishing. Zimerman, who, from everything I've heard, is a pathological perfectionist, approached this project with the highest level of ambition even for him. The manager told me that Zimerman even persuaded him, like here, of course, I'm gossiping a little bit, and I hope that Maestro Zimerman will forgive me if he ever watches this video, but that's a really peculiar detail that, as far as I know from the manager, that Zimerman even persuaded him to order a whole set of displays to install on the music stand of every orchestra member, displays which would in real time show close footage of Zimerman's hands. So the orchestra musicians could see his hands for perfect synchronization. But when the expensive equipment finally arrived, Zimerman looked at those displays and he was like, no, I changed my mind. We don't need that. The manager, of course, understandably was absolutely furious because it was so expensive to buy them in the first place. But to achieve something truly extraordinary, you have to think outside of the box. be fearless in experimenting, and maybe just a little bit crazy, of course, in the best possible sense. And this performance blows my mind with its originality and exquisite attention to detail. It's honestly hard to believe it's the same person if you compare it with the earlier recording. And it's a powerful reminder that everything changes, and artists are no exception. So let's compare the earlier and later versions. Here, Zimerman plays really well, but I'd risk to say there is nothing particularly special. Listen to any finalist of a major international competition and you'll get a fairly similar experience. But in the next fragment, you can hear an astonishing detail. Zimerman holds a long note after the orchestra falls silent, and it lasts for so long. And this prolonged note, this really long fermata, creates a delicious sense of suspension, as if time itself is lingering before the second theme appears. The second theme here is truly remarkable. Zimerman demonstrates a unique ability to feel micro nuances of emotion between the notes. One striking feature is his extensive use of the so-called Russian type of rubato, where you take time before the next beat. In my video on Grigory Sokolov, I explained the difference between the Russian and German types, so check it out, and why the Russian approach is actually more dangerous sometimes. And even when Sokolov uses it, it doesn't always convince me, I have to say. The problem here is that stretching time before the beat can very easily break the flow, and it can sound like a hiccup or something pretentious, like moving with effort. Yeah? And sometimes it doesn't sound natural. But here, the way Zimerman does it is completely convincing for me personally. And this is a great example of a known paradox. Usually we warn our students not to disrupt the flow, not to stop mid-phrase, because when a person doesn't feel the unity of the phrase, doesn't feel the flow, even one tiny delay sounds awkward and amateur-like. But on the highest level, the very thing that was so dangerous on the medium level, on the highest level of mastery, this becomes a secret ingredient. So look how many times Zimerman stops the flow, makes rubato in one phrase, but without breaking its unity. The secret why it feels organic is because he knows exactly where the melody is going, he feels the unity of the phrase, and feels perfectly how much time one can take between the notes to convey musical intensity, but without breaking the flow. And here's a crucial thing about playing bel canto in romantic music, because when you play a passage from Mozart, for example, it's absolutely appropriate to feel where the peak of the phrase is and to mark that peak. Like, for example, like here, for example, we know that those are our top notes, so we want to mark them, articulate them clearly, right? Or, for example, this theme. If it would be Mozart, this would be an absolutely appropriate execution when I feel that I go to the top of the phrase, I clearly show it, and then I descend. But in romantic music, it doesn't sound really well. You see, it sounds a little bit forced. So what Zimerman beautifully does here, he smoothens the top, feeling the intensity between F sharp and G sharp, where the last note is played in a kind of like when the melody exhausts itself already. with a little kind of hesitation. And this is, of course, a much better way to play a romantic phrase. And of course, it's really astonishing how mild his touch is. So even in the audio recording, even by just listening to it without visual representation, you can actually feel how closely his fingers are to the keys and how tenderly he dives into each key. So this shaping might be a little bit close to bel canto tradition. If you want to understand the difference between good technique and true mastery, where technique becomes merely a tool, where a performer is not just playing the correct notes at the right time, but truly feels articulation and what is called intonatia, the art of connecting the notes musically and aligning them masterfully so it sounds really expressive. Listen to this comparison between the earlier and later recording, because the difference is astonishing. Another marvelous moment. Any decent musician knows that one must react to harmonic changes. It's a cornerstone of musicality, because Western music is all about creating tension and resolving it. But how exactly? What do you want to express with your interpretation? Of course, you can react to a raised pitch by playing it more intensively, and this is a standard approach. So you can react on that G sharp as tension rises. Something like that. But what Zimerman does is way more beautiful. He makes it actually softer as a surprise. So thank you for watching this. I hope this was interesting. In the next video, I'm going to share with you some technical tips of what I have understood by analyzing Zimerman performances. And if you want to study with me, check out my courses by following the link in the description.